Three little wooden dolls. This is what you're calling revolutionary art? This is what you're claiming changed the entire industry? The lawyer's voice dripped with mockery as he held up photos of my earliest puppets. These crude attempts that you somehow transformed into a career worth millions? My client was developing groundbreaking techniques while you were fetching coffee. Everything you've built is stolen property. I sat frozen at the defendant's table as he displayed my life's work on oversized boards, each labeled derivative and plagiarized in bold red letters. The courtroom seemed to shrink around me, the air thinning with each accusation. Ms. Preston abandoned her work temporarily due to a family crisis, expecting her assistant to safeguard her intellectual property. Instead, he gestured dramatically toward me. This woman saw opportunity. She capitalized on another artist's innovation and built an empire on stolen dreams. My attorney squeezed my hand under the table, but I barely felt it. 15 years of dedication reduced to theft in minutes. My chest tightened as memories flashed. Countless nights carving until my fingers bled, teaching myself techniques no one would show me, fighting for every opportunity in a world that constantly questioned if puppet artistry was even relevant anymore. The plaintiff doesn't merely seek financial compensation, the lawyer continued, pacing before the jury. She seeks recognition of what was taken from her, the chance to see her vision transform an art form, a vision now incorrectly attributed to the defendant. I looked across the courtroom where she sat. Veronica, my former boss, perfectly composed in a cream-colored dress, her silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, eyes never leaving mine. Not once in 15 years had she contacted me until the lawsuit arrived. Not once had she claimed these designs until my recent museum exhibition received international acclaim. The judge called for a brief recess. As people filed out, I remained seated, too numb to move, staring at the three puppets now sitting in evidence boxes. They looked so small, so ordinary compared to what they'd become in my hands. But what if he was right? What if everything I believed about my talent was built on someone else's foundation? I didn't know then that by tomorrow, I would uncover a truth so devastating it would change everything. I couldn't have guessed that the real story began long before I ever met Veronica, or that my revenge would be served not with malice, but with a revelation that would silence the entire courtroom. If you're captivated by this story of betrayal and wondering how it unfolds, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more riveting tales of justice and vengeance. Drop a comment with your thoughts on what might be inside that mysterious envelope. Your support helps me continue creating these stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Now, let's dive deeper into how this all began. My name is Diana. Before the lawsuit, before the fame, before the three puppets changed my life, I was just a quiet artist seeking my place in the world. People often described me as intensely observant. I noticed details others missed, from the subtle shifts in facial expressions to the way light transformed ordinary objects into something magical. This sensitivity made me an outsider growing up, but became my greatest strength as an artist. I came to the Moonlight Theater Company fresh out of art school, hired as a general assistant with no specific artistic role. The theater was housed in a converted warehouse with high ceilings and massive windows that flooded the space with natural light. Despite its impressive architecture, the company operated on a shoestring budget, producing experimental shows that rarely drew large crowds but maintained a devoted following among avant-garde theater enthusiasts. Veronica ruled this small kingdom with absolute authority, tall and imposing with penetrating green eyes that seemed to evaluate your worth in seconds. She had built a reputation for creating visually stunning productions that pushed boundaries. Everyone spoke of her in reverent whispers, and I considered myself impossibly lucky to work under her guidance. "You have good hands," she told me during my interview, studying my fingers with unusual intensity. "Steady, patient. That's rare these days." For 3 months, I did whatever was needed. Painted sets, organized costumes, delivered messages between departments, and spent hours watching Veronica work from a respectful distance. She rarely acknowledged my presence, but I absorbed everything. Her techniques, her artistic decisions, her management style that alternated between brilliant inspiration and cold dismissal. The company was preparing for its most ambitious production yet, an experimental piece called Forgotten Whispers that would combine human actors with life-size puppets, representing memory and dream. Veronica had been secretive about the puppet designs, working alone in her studio at the back of the building, refusing to show anyone her progress. That Tuesday began like any other. I arrived early, organized the day's schedules, and prepared coffee for the morning production meeting. The theater hummed with activity, carpenters hammering at the set, actors warming up their voices in scattered corners, lighting technicians adjusting instruments above. I was alone at my small desk when Veronica appeared suddenly beside me, arms cradling 3 partially completed puppets. Without preamble, she placed them on my desk. "Keep an eye on these until I get back," she said, already turning to leave. 2 hours, max. The puppets were unlike anything I'd seen before, not fully formed, but clearly showing revolutionary potential. The first had a face half carved from pale wood, features emerging like a face pushing through water, with joints that seemed to float rather than connect. The second was smaller, with fabric stretched over a wire frame in a way that suggested both fragility and fluidity. The third was the most complete, a nearly finished figure with intricate hand detailing and eyes that seemed to follow movement. I sat motionless, afraid to touch them, only allowing myself to study how each was constructed. The techniques were unfamiliar, not the standard approaches taught in my classes or shown in the reference books I'd studied. These puppets seemed alive even in their unfinished state, each joint and connection designed to move with uncanny naturalism. 2 hours passed, then 4. By evening, the theater director, Henry, came looking for Veronica. "Where is she? We need decisions on the backdrop projections today." She left these with me," I explained, gesturing to the puppets. "Said she'd be back in 2 hours. That was this morning." Henry frowned, pulling out his phone to call her again. After a brief conversation, his expression darkened. "She says there's a family emergency. She's taken immediate leave and won't be back for the production." The news rippled through the company like an earthquake. Veronica had never missed a production, had never abandoned a project mid-creation. Emergency meetings were called, roles reassigned. The show, scheduled to open in 3 weeks, suddenly had no artistic director. As everyone scattered to salvage what they could, I sat alone with the puppets, uncertain what to do with them. "Henry," I called as he rushed past. "What about these? They're for the show, but they're not finished." He stopped, running a hand through his thinning hair, looking at the puppets with weary resignation. "Finish them or find replacements," he shrugged. "Your call. We need something by next week." That night, after everyone left, I stayed behind, examining the puppets under the work lights. I had basic crafting skills, but had never attempted puppet construction of this complexity. Still, with the show in jeopardy and no one else volunteering, I had little choice. I began with simple research, visiting the theater's small library and searching online for puppet-making techniques. Nothing I found matched what Veronica had started. These puppets employed methods I couldn't identify, joints that allowed movement I'd never seen, facial structures that seemed to change expression with the slightest tilt. For 3 days, I barely slept, attempting to understand what she had begun. On the 4th night, in desperation, I made a decision that would alter my life's course. I would start over, not trying to copy Veronica's unknown techniques, but developing my own approach based on what these unfinished pieces inspired in me. I kept the basic designs but reimagined their mechanics. Where Veronica had used a complex joint system I couldn't replicate, I created a simpler but equally effective alternative. Where her facial carving technique eluded me, I developed a layered approach that achieved similar expressiveness. The fabric puppet I completely reimagined, using a technique I invented through trial and error involving heat-shaped materials and strategic stitching. For 2 weeks, I worked through nights and weekends, my hands blistered, then calloused. I learned to carve wood by practicing on scraps until my cuts became precise. I studied movement by watching dancers rehearse, translating human grace into mechanical possibility. What emerged were not copies of Veronica's concepts, but something new, puppets that carried the ghost of her original vision but expressed through my developing voice. When I finally brought them to rehearsal, the cast fell silent. "These are," Henry began, then stopped, wordless for perhaps the first time since I'd known him. The lead actress approached slowly, extending a hand toward the largest puppet. "May I?" I nodded, and she lifted it, testing its movement. The puppet seemed to come alive in her hands, responding to the slightest manipulation with fluid, almost breathing motion. "They're better than what Veronica described," she whispered. They have souls." Opening night arrived with the nervous energy that accompanies all theatrical premieres. I stood backstage, watching through a gap in the curtains as the audience filled our small theater. The puppets waited on their stands, finished and perfect, no longer bearing any obvious connection to the half-formed figures Veronica had abandoned. The house lights dimmed, music swelled, and when the first puppet appeared on stage, moving with the actress as if they shared one mind, I heard the collective gasp of the audience. Something awakened in me then, a recognition of my true calling. The show received standing ovations and the best reviews in the company's history. Critics specifically mentioned the revolutionary puppet design that transcends the medium. No one knew they were my creation. The program credited Moonlight Theater Collective for all design elements. As the cast celebrated at the opening night party, Henry found me hiding in the back of the room. "Those puppets," he said, studying me with new interest. "Veronica didn't make those, did she?" I hesitated, uncertain how to answer. "No," I finally admitted. "I couldn't figure out her techniques. I had to create my own." He nodded slowly. "You should take credit, Diana. This is the beginning of something important." I didn't know then how prophetic his words would be, or how those 3 puppets would eventually bring Veronica back into my life with devastating consequences. I couldn't have imagined that 15 years later, I would stand in a courtroom, fighting for my artistic legacy against the woman who had unwittingly set me on my path. And I had no way of knowing that the envelope I would eventually hand to the judge contained something far more personal than evidence of artistic ownership, something that would change not just the outcome of the trial, but the very story of who I was. I never meant to make puppetry my life's work. After the success of Forgotten Whispers, I returned to my assistant duties, expecting things to return to normal when Veronica came back. But weeks passed, then months. Henry offered me a small role designing puppets for their next production, a children's show that typically used simple store-bought marionettes. "Show me what you can do with a proper budget this time," he said, handing me a small sum that felt like a fortune after scraping by on art store clearance bins. Those first puppets I created intentionally, characters of my own design rather than emergency replacements, caught the attention of a visiting director from a larger theater. She commissioned me to create a series for her upcoming production, offering triple what Henry could pay. "You can't leave," Henry protested when I showed him the offer letter. "We need you here." "I'm not leaving," I assured him. "I can do both." And for a while, I did. By day, I continued my assistant work at Moonlight. By night, I built my first professional puppet collection in my tiny apartment. Word spread quickly in the close-knit theater community. Within a year, I was receiving commissions from 3 different states. I converted my living room into a workshop, sleeping on a futon tucked into the corner. My dining table became my carving station. My kitchen counters held paints and finishes. I developed my signature style through constant experimentation. Puppets with mechanisms so subtle audiences forgot they weren't alive, expressions that changed with lighting and angle, movements that captured human emotion with uncanny precision. The pivotal moment came when the National Theater Festival selected one of my pieces for their annual showcase. Theater professionals from across the country would see my work. I needed something spectacular. I created Remembrance, a puppet depicting an elderly woman whose face contained layers of younger versions visible in certain lights, a physical manifestation of memory and aging. When manipulated, she moved with the fragility of age but occasionally slipped into the fluid motion of youth, as if momentarily remembering her former self. After the showcase, a museum curator approached me. "We're planning an exhibition on innovative puppetry," she said. "Your work represents exactly the direction we want to highlight." That first museum exhibition led to others. Articles were written. A documentary filmmaker followed me for 6 months. I established a small studio, hired apprentices, taught workshops. I developed a reputation for innovation in an art form many considered outdated. Throughout those 15 years, I never heard from Veronica. Occasionally, someone from the theater world mentioned running into her in Chicago or Seattle, always with a new project, never staying anywhere long. I thought of her less and less as years passed, the memory of those original 3 puppets fading behind the hundreds I'd created since. Then came the letter. I was in my studio supervising final touches on a commission for an international theater festival when my assistant brought in the mail. "This one's certified," she said, holding out an envelope. Had to sign for it. The return address showed a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was formal notice of a lawsuit filed by Veronica Preston against me personally and my studio as a business entity, claiming intellectual property theft, design infringement, and damages totaling millions. The documents alleged that the 3 puppets she'd left with me contained proprietary design elements and techniques she'd been developing for years. According to her claim, every puppet I'd created since utilized her innovative methods without attribution or compensation. She demanded not just financial restitution, but public acknowledgement that my entire career stemmed from her work. Attached were dated sketches showing puppet designs with similarities to my style, along with technical drawings of joint systems and facial mechanisms that indeed resembled some I used. I called Henry immediately, my voice shaking. "Did you know about this? Did you know she was developing these techniques before she left?" "Diana, that was 15 years ago," he sighed. "But no, none of us knew what she was working on. She was always secretive. The theater must have records of what happened, how she left, what she said about coming back. The ownership changed 5 years ago, remember? Most of those records are gone. And I'm retired now. I can testify about what I remember, but..." His voice trailed off, and I understood the problem. Memories fade, people move on, documentation disappears. What remained were her dated sketches against my word. I hired the best intellectual property attorney I could afford, who immediately requested all Veronica's evidence. What came back chilled me. She had detailed notebooks dating back 18 years, showing the development of techniques remarkably similar to ones I used. She had testimonials from former colleagues claiming she had discussed her revolutionary puppet concepts before her departure. Most damning, she had photographs of the original 3 unfinished puppets, showing structural elements that did appear in my later work. Could she have created these records after the fact? I asked my lawyer. "The notebooks are date-stamped and notarized," he said grimly. "The photographs were digitally authenticated. It's going to be hard to prove fabrication." "But she abandoned those puppets," I insisted. "She left without a word for 15 years. Abandonment doesn't automatically transfer intellectual property rights," he explained. "And she claims the family emergency was caring for her mother with dementia, a sympathetic reason for her absence." The lawsuit quickly made industry news. Headlines questioned my originality. Former admirers distanced themselves. Commissions were put on hold, pending resolution. 15 years of reputation building began unraveling in weeks. The case proceeded with crushing momentum. Veronica's lawyers presented expert witnesses who highlighted the similarities between her early sketches and my established techniques. They displayed side-by-side comparisons of joint mechanisms, facial construction methods, and movement systems that showed undeniable resemblances. My own experts argued that these similarities represented natural evolutions in puppet design rather than direct copies, but their testimony seemed weak against the mountain of dated documentation Veronica provided. During her testimony, Veronica played her role perfectly, the innovative artist whose moment of crisis had created vulnerability her assistant exploited. "I never imagined she would take my unfinished concepts and claim them as her own," Veronica said, voice trembling just enough to convey genuine hurt. "I was dealing with my mother's rapid decline, making impossible choices between my career and family duty. I trusted Diana to safeguard my work, not build her career on it." As she spoke, I studied her face, searching for the woman I had once admired so intensely. She had aged beautifully, silver streaking her dark hair, fine lines adding character to her striking features. Her hands still moved with the precise grace I remembered, gesturing to emphasize points as she testified. These were the hands that had created those original puppets. Or had they? A strange memory surfaced as I watched her. Something about the way she had examined my hands during my interview, commenting on their steadiness. At the time, I'd taken it as professional assessment, but now it felt different, as if she had been evaluating me for something specific. That night, unable to sleep, I pulled out old photos from my first days at the theater. In one group shot, I noticed something in the background, a calendar hanging on the wall with a local puppet theater's performance schedule. Something about that theater's name triggered a vague recollection. I spent hours searching online until I found what I was looking for. An old newspaper article about a small puppet theater that had operated 30 years earlier, run by a married couple known for their innovative designs. The article mentioned their tragic deaths in a workshop fire, leaving behind a 5-year-old daughter. There was a photo of the couple holding puppets with hauntingly familiar construction. My hands started shaking as I studied their faces, looking for something I couldn't name. The woman had my eyes. The man, my smile. I called my attorney at 3 a.m. "I need to find out if I was adopted," I said without preamble. "Diana, it's the middle of the night. What does this have to do with everything?" I interrupted. "It might have everything to do with the case." The following days became a frantic search through records I'd never thought to examine. My parents, the people who raised me, had passed away years ago. They had never mentioned adoption, but they'd also been notably silent about my early childhood. With my lawyer's help, I obtained my birth certificate. It listed different parents than those who raised me. Further digging revealed adoption papers processed when I was 5 years old, the same age as the puppet maker's orphan daughter. The evidence accumulated with sickening clarity. The puppeteers who died in that fire were my birth parents. Their innovative techniques had died with them, or would have if not for the 3 unfinished puppets that somehow survived the fire. The final confirmation came from an elderly puppeteer I tracked down who had known my birth parents. Those 3 pieces were their masterworks in progress, he told me during a video call, his voice quavering with age. They were developing a completely new approach to movement and expression. Everyone in our small community knew about them, though few had seen them. After the fire, those puppets disappeared. We assumed they'd burned too. "How would someone outside your community know about them?" I asked. "There was a journalist doing a story on innovative puppet design," he recalled. "Interviewed several artists, including your parents. The article never published, the magazine folded, but she saw the unfinished pieces during her research. Do you remember her name?" He thought for a moment. "Something with a V. Victoria? Valerie? Veronica?" I suggested, my stomach dropping. "Yes, that's it." Ambitious young woman asked very technical questions. The courthouse felt cavernous as I entered for what would likely be the final day of trial. Veronica sat confidently at the plaintiff's table, occasionally whispering to her attorneys. The gallery was packed with industry professionals and journalists, all expecting to witness my professional downfall. My attorney had begged me to accept a settlement offer that had arrived that morning, a generous proposal allowing me to continue working if I publicly credited Veronica as the originator of my techniques and paid her substantial royalties on all past and future work. "We don't have enough to win," he had insisted. "The documented evidence is too strong." But I had one piece of evidence left to the envelope I now carried. When the judge called the court to order, my attorney began his closing statement, emphasizing my independent development as an artist, while acknowledging the circumstantial similarities between my work and Veronica's documented designs. As he concluded, I stood. "Your Honor, I have additional evidence I'd like to submit." The judge frowned. "Counselor, discovery is complete. Why wasn't this submitted earlier?" "I only obtained final verification last night," I explained, approaching the bench with the sealed envelope. After some debate and over objections from Veronica's attorneys, the judge agreed to review the contents. He opened the envelope carefully, studied each item inside, then looked up with an expression of profound surprise. "Do they know what's inside?" he asked quietly, gesturing toward Veronica and her legal team. "Not yet," I replied. As I turned to face the courtroom, I saw Veronica's confident expression waver slightly. She couldn't know what I had discovered, couldn't know that her carefully constructed case was about to collapse. But something in my face must have signaled the turning tide. I had no idea that my words would not only save my career, but would uncover a theft far more profound than artistic techniques. Identity, the theft of my very identity. And I couldn't have imagined that my revenge would come not through destroying Veronica, but through reclaiming what was always mine. The judge cleared his throat, preparing to reveal what the envelope contained, evidence that would transform everything we thought we knew about this case, about Veronica, and about me. The judge handed the documents back to me, nodding permission to proceed. I turned to face the packed courtroom, suddenly aware of how quiet it had become. Even the usual shuffling and whispers had ceased, as if everyone sensed the importance of what was about to happen. "Your Honor, members of the court," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'd like to present 3 items that tell the true story of these puppets." I held up the first document. "This is a birth certificate for Diana Merrick, born to Thomas and Eleanor Merrick 35 years ago." I placed it on the evidence table. These were my birth parents. Next, I lifted a yellowed newspaper clipping. This is an obituary from 30 years ago, reporting the deaths of Thomas and Eleanor Merrick in a workshop fire. They were renowned puppet makers, known for pioneering techniques in movement and expression. I set it beside the birth certificate. I was 5 years old when they died. Finally, I revealed the third document, a small article with a faded photograph. This is from a local arts newsletter, published 1 month before their deaths. It mentions 3 revolutionary puppet designs the Merricks were developing, pieces that would transform the art form. According to this article, these puppets weren't kept in their main workshop but in a separate studio where they taught occasional classes. I looked directly at Veronica for the first time. Her face had gone completely still, her eyes locked on the documents. The fire that killed my parents destroyed their main workshop. I was adopted by family friends who never spoke about my birth parents, perhaps thinking it would be less painful for me to forget. I grew up not knowing who I was or where I came from. The judge leaned forward. "And how does this relate to the puppets in question, Miss Merrick?" "That's said, as in of Causanem as Merrick." I pointed to the final page in the evidence packet, a signed affidavit. This statement is from Martin Weber, a puppet maker who knew my parents well. He confirms that Veronica Preston, then an arts journalist researching innovative puppet design, interviewed my parents 2 months before their deaths. She saw the 3 unfinished puppets and took extensive notes on their construction. Veronica's attorney jumped to his feet. "Objection, this is hearsay and irrelevant to the intellectual property claim." "On the contrary," my attorney countered, "it goes directly to the provenance of the designs Ms. Preston claims as her own." The judge overruled the objection, motioning for me to continue. After my parents died, those 3 puppets disappeared. Everyone assumed they had been destroyed, but they hadn't. I turned to face Veronica directly. "You tracked them down, didn't you? You discovered they had been stored at the teaching studio, not in the main workshop that burned." Veronica's composure finally cracked, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "You spent years finding them, then purchased them from a distant relative who had no idea of their significance. And when you became artistic director at Moonlight Theater, you did one more thing." I took a deep breath. "You searched for me." Whispers erupted around the courtroom. "The timing wasn't coincidence. You hired me 3 months after I graduated from art school, after seeing my student work in a showcase. You knew exactly who I was, the daughter of the innovative puppet makers whose techniques you coveted. You wanted to see if I had inherited their talent." The judge raised his hand. "Ms. Merrick, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence that Ms. Preston knew your identity?" I nodded, retrieving one final document from the envelope. "This is my employment application from Moonlight Theater. You'll notice my emergency contact was my adoptive aunt, Sarah Reynolds. On the back is a note in Veronica's handwriting asking the personnel manager to verify the connection between Sarah Reynolds and the Merrick family." The courtroom fell silent as the judge examined the document. "When you placed those 3 puppets on my desk 15 years ago," I said, looking at Veronica, "you weren't just abandoning some unfinished projects. You were returning my birthright to me. You wanted to see what I would do with them, if I would instinctively understand their construction the way my parents had." Veronica's attorney was frantically whispering to her, but she brushed him off, her eyes never leaving mine. "What I don't understand," I continued, "is why you came back now. Why sue me after all these years? These techniques were never yours to claim." For the first time, Veronica spoke directly to me rather than through her attorneys. "Because you surpassed them," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the silent courtroom. "Your parents were brilliant, but you took their foundation further than they ever could have. I watched your career from a distance, waiting to see if you'd reach your potential." She stood, ignoring her lawyer's attempt to pull her back. "The techniques in those original puppets were revolutionary, but limited. I spent years trying to develop them myself with no success. But you understood them instinctively and evolved them beyond anything I imagined possible. So this lawsuit was, what? Jealousy?" the judge asked. Veronica shook her head. "Recognition. I wanted the world to know these techniques had origins, that they came from somewhere, from someone. From my parents," I said, "not from you." "I preserved what would have been lost," she countered, a hint of desperation entering her voice. "I saved those puppets when no one else cared. I brought them back to their rightful heir when I could have kept them hidden forever." The judge had heard enough. "Miss Preston, are you admitting that you claimed ownership of designs that weren't yours?" Her attorney tried to intervene, but Veronica silenced him with a gesture. "I'm saying I protected an artistic legacy. I ensured these techniques survived. By attempting to take credit for them, the judge noted, by suing their rightful inheritor for millions of dollars. The remaining proceedings happened rapidly. The judge not only dismissed Veronica's case, but directed the court clerk to forward evidence to the district attorney for potential fraud charges. He issued a declaratory judgment affirming my rights to all my artistic works and techniques. As the courtroom began to empty, Veronica approached me, her lawyers trailing behind, clearly distressed by her actions. "They would be proud of you," she said softly. "I knew the moment I saw your hands. You have your father's hands. The way you hold tools, the precision of your movements, it's genetic." "You could have told me," I replied, the anger I'd expected to feel strangely absent. "You could have shared their story with me instead of trying to steal it. Would you have believed me? A stranger telling you your entire identity was different than you thought? I considered this. Maybe not, but you didn't even try." She nodded, accepting this truth. "When I saw what you created from those unfinished pieces, how quickly you solved problems that had stumped me for years, I knew you were truly their daughter. I should have walked away then." "Why didn't you?" She glanced around at the reporters, hovering nearby, hungry for quotes. "I convinced myself I deserved recognition too, for preserving their work, for connecting you to your legacy, even if you didn't know it." "And the lawsuit?" "A mistake," she admitted. "When the museum exhibition called you the most innovative voice in modern puppetry, something broke in me. I'd spent 20 years studying their techniques, and you mastered them in weeks without even knowing what you were doing." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "Veronica, the things you wrote in your notebooks about the joint mechanisms, the modifications to make them more fluid, those weren't in my parents' original designs, were they?" She paused. "No, those were mine. Small contributions. They were valuable," I acknowledged. That floating joint system changed everything about how the puppets moved. Something like gratitude flickered across her face before she composed herself and walked away, surrounded by her legal team, into a crowd of reporters shouting questions. Outside the courthouse, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages and calls. The story was spreading rapidly through the arts community. Not just my vindication, but the discovery of my connection to the legendary Merrick puppet makers. Galleries that had distanced themselves during the lawsuit were suddenly eager to host exhibitions. Theaters reaffirmed commissions. Documentary filmmakers proposed new projects. But amid the professional chaos, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in my life, I had context for my abilities, understanding why creating puppets had always felt like remembering rather than learning. The hands never forget, even when the mind does. 1 week after the trial concluded, I received a package at my studio. Inside was a worn leather case containing faded photographs of my parents, technical drawings in my father's hand, and a letter from my mother addressed to me on my 6th birthday, a birthday she didn't live to see. With them was a note from Veronica. "These belong to you all along. I kept them safe until you were ready. This is the last of what I gathered about your parents over the years. Their legacy is now entirely in your hands, where it belongs." There was no signature, no return address, the final act in our strange, intertwined story. I opened a new exhibition 3 months later, not of my own work, but of restored pieces created by my birth parents, alongside the 3 original puppets that had started everything. In the center of the gallery, I placed a collaborative piece, one of my designs incorporating the floating joint system Veronica had developed. The placard read, "In puppet artistry, we all build upon what came before. This piece honors the Merrick legacy, with recognition of contributions by Veronica Preston." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement, the thing she had wanted all along. My revenge wasn't destroying her, but reclaiming my story while still making space for truth. The exhibition catalog included the full narrative, how my parents' innovations had been preserved, how their techniques lived on through my work, and how even Veronica's misguided actions had ultimately served to unite me with my heritage. Critics called it the most powerful artistic origin story of our time. On opening night, as crowds filled the gallery, I stood before a photograph of my parents, holding puppets remarkably similar to those I now created. A reporter approached, recorder in hand. "How does it feel to discover your artistic DNA so dramatically?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. Like finding the missing piece of a puppet, the joint that makes everything else move correctly. I always knew how to make things come alive. Now I know why. "And Veronica Preston?" Any comment on her current situation? I shook my head. Her story is hers to tell. Mine is here, in this room, connecting past to future. As the reporter moved away, I noticed a figure at the back of the gallery, silver-streaked hair, familiar posture. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded room. Veronica gave a slight nod before disappearing through the exit. Some stories end with dramatic confrontation, others with quiet acknowledgement. Mine ended with reclamation of my history, my talent, and my future. The orphaned daughter of puppet makers had found her way home, guided by the very hands that had tried to claim her birthright. In puppet theater, we say the true artist disappears while the puppet lives. Perhaps that's the most fitting end to this story. Not the people behind it, but what we created that will outlive us all. If this story of reclaimed legacy and artistic justice moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more tales of vindication and rediscovery. In the comments, I'd love to know, what family talents or traits have you inherited that connect you to your past? Have you ever discovered something about your heritage that changed how you see yourself? Your stories and support help this channel continue bringing these deeply human narratives to life. Thank you for listening to Diana's journey of reclaiming what was always rightfully hers. This is his now. You're moving to storage, Director Pearson announced, gesturing toward his nephew who stood beside him with a smug grin stretching across his face. I stared at the space I'd occupied for 5 years, my ergonomic chair precisely positioned for the view of downtown, my inspiration board covered with color swatches and fabric samples, the custom lighting I'd installed myself, all being handed to someone who'd been with the company for exactly 3 days. The storage room? I asked, my voice impossibly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. End of the hall. We've put a desk in there. Pearson adjusted his tie, not quite meeting my eyes. It's temporary, probably. The nephew, Ezra, sauntered forward and ran his finger along my desk. My desk, the one I'd used to design the collection that saved this company from bankruptcy last year. I'll take good care of it, he said with a wink. I smiled. Not the practiced corporate smile I'd perfected over 8 years of client meetings. A different smile altogether, one that made something flicker in Pearson's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps even fear. Of course, I said, gathering my personal items into a cardboard box someone had thoughtfully placed on my chair. It's just an office. Ezra laughed, already settling into my chair, spinning it around like a child. One more thing, I added, pausing at the door, my voice honey-sweet. That desk drawer sticks sometimes. Has a special way of opening it. I'm sure I'll figure it out, Ezra replied dismissively. As I walked away, clutching my box of belongings, something cold and precise was already taking shape in my mind. They thought they were watching me leave in defeat. They had no idea they were watching me transform. What they'd done wasn't just unfair. It was their first mistake. And I never let a first mistake go unpunished. If you're enjoying this story of workplace betrayal, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to hear how this revenge tale unfolds. Trust me, what happens next is something you won't want to miss. Drop a comment about the worst workplace injustice you've ever experienced. I read every single one. My name is Tallulah Reed, not Tally, not Lou, Tallulah. The full 3 syllables demand attention, much like I do. At 34, I'd spent exactly 1/3 of my life climbing the ranks at Everest Designs, where I'd transformed from junior assistant to lead design strategist, through sheer force of will and undeniable talent. I've always been the person who stays latest, arrives earliest, and works through lunch, not because I'm desperate for approval, because I believe in excellence. My designs aren't just aesthetically pleasing. They solve problems people didn't even know they had. That's my gift. I see patterns others miss, including patterns of betrayal. The storage room Pearson had generously provided measured exactly 8 feet by 10 feet. One flickering fluorescent light, no windows, a desk that wobbled on uneven legs, the smell of old paper and something faintly chemical. The walls were lined with metal shelves overflowing with supplies, sample materials, and dusty catalogs from 2014. I placed my small potted succulent, the only plant that could survive in this lightless cave, on the corner of the desk and pulled out the folding chair. It creaked ominously under my weight. Through the thin walls, I could hear Ezra's laughter as he settled into my former space. Showing off for visitors already. No doubt. The storage room door had no lock, meaning anyone could barge in at any time looking for paper clips or staples. I took a deep breath and opened my laptop. This wasn't the first time Pearson had shown his true colors. 3 years ago, he'd taken credit for my holiday collection concept during the board presentation. Last year, he'd forgotten to mention my name when accepting the Industry Innovation Award my designs had won. But this, giving away my workspace to his unqualified nephew, this was different. This was public humiliation. The walls of my new office seemed to press in closer. I reached for my water bottle, unscrewed the cap, and took a long drink. Then I opened a new document and began to type. Not designs, not concepts, something else entirely. The first week in the storage room was exactly as torturous as I'd anticipated. Constant interruptions from coworkers needing supplies. The temperature fluctuated between Arctic and tropical with no middle ground. My productivity plummeted as I struggled to concentrate with people walking in and out all day. Meanwhile, Ezra strutted around the office like royalty. Despite having zero qualifications or experience in design, Pearson had given him the title Creative Innovation Specialist, a position that apparently required a lot of long lunches and personal calls on company time. "Tallulah, do you have those concept boards for the Riverstone project?" Pearson asked, poking his head into my storage room on Friday afternoon. "Yes, I completed them yesterday," I replied, pulling up the files on my computer. "I can send them over right now." "Great. Send them to Ezra. He'll be presenting them to the client on Monday." My fingers froze over the keyboard. "Excuse me?" "Ezra needs some wins to establish himself with the team. The Riverstone project is perfect. Straightforward, already developed. Just forward him all your notes and mock-ups." The injustice burned like acid in my throat. That's my project. I've been developing the relationship with Riverstone for over a year. Pearson's expression hardened. "It's a company project, and I decide who presents to clients. Send Ezra the files before you leave today." After he left, I sat motionless, staring at my screen. This wasn't just about an office anymore. This was about my work, my reputation, my future. That evening, long after everyone else had gone home, I remained in my storage room. The building was eerily quiet as I searched through digital archives, hunting for information that might give me leverage. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, just something, anything, to help me understand why Pearson was so determined to elevate his nephew at my expense. At 9:47 p.m., frustrated and ready to give up, I noticed something odd. A financial report from last quarter showed a substantial payment to a consultant I'd never heard of, Carrick Co. The amount seemed excessive for the deliverables described. Curious, I dug deeper. 3 hours later, my eyes burning from staring at the screen, I had uncovered a pattern that made my heart race. Over the past 2 years, Pearson had authorized payments totaling over $800,000 to Carrick Co. for market research and competitive analysis, work that seemed suspiciously vague and impossible to verify. More interesting still, Carrick Co. had been registered just 3 weeks before receiving their first payment from our company. The registration was under the name Lydia Pearson, Director Pearson's sister, Ezra's mother. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces clicking into place. This wasn't just nepotism. This was potentially embezzlement, funneling company money to his sister through a fake consultancy. But I needed more evidence before I could act, and I needed to be very, very careful. The next morning, Saturday, I arrived at the office before dawn. Weekend security was minimal, just a sign-in sheet and cameras in the main areas. The executive floor, where Pearson's office was located, had keycard access, but as a department head, I still had clearance. My heart pounded as I swiped my card and entered the silent executive corridor. Pearson's office door was locked, but I wasn't planning to enter. Instead, I headed to the executive assistant's desk. Bridget had been Pearson's assistant for over a decade. If anyone had records of these consultancy arrangements, it would be her. I booted up her computer, grateful that IT had standardized all our systems last month. The login screen appeared, and I hesitated. This was crossing a line. If caught, I could lose my job, possibly face legal consequences. But then I remembered Ezra's smug face as he settled into my chair. I remembered 5 years of Pearson taking credit for my work. I remembered being banished to a storage closet after 8 years of dedication. I typed in the temporary password it had issued during the system update, the one most employees never bothered to change. The screen unlocked. Within minutes, I found what I was looking for. A folder labeled Carrick Co. Special Projects, containing correspondence between Pearson and his sister, detailed invoices for work never performed, and calendar entries for meetings that never happened. This was it. Proof of financial misconduct that could not only get Pearson fired, but potentially prosecuted. I plugged in my flash drive and began copying files. A noise in the hallway made me freeze. Footsteps. Someone else was in the office. I quickly closed the folders, ejected my drive, and shut down the computer. The footsteps grew louder, approaching the executive suite. I ducked behind a tall filing cabinet just as the door opened. "Hello, anyone here?" It was the weekend security guard making his rounds. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall, praying he wouldn't do a thorough check. After what felt like an eternity, he sighed, mumbled something about sensors malfunctioning, and closed the door again. I waited 5 more minutes before emerging from my hiding spot, my legs trembling. I had what I needed. Now I had to decide what to do with it. Monday morning brought a new development. As I was organizing my cramped workspace, trying to create some semblance of functionality, Pearson appeared at my door. "Company meeting in 30 minutes. Boardroom. Don't be late." His tone was clipped, his expression unreadable. In the boardroom, I took a seat at the back, noting that every employee was present, unusual for a Monday morning. Pearson stood at the front, Ezra beside him, looking uncommonly serious. "I have an important announcement," Pearson began. "Our CEO just confirmed that Visionary Partners will be visiting next week to discuss a potential acquisition of our company." Murmurs erupted around the room. Visionary Partners was one of the largest investment firms in the country. An acquisition could mean big changes, potentially positive for some, devastating for others. "This is a crucial opportunity," Pearson continued. "Each department will prepare a presentation showcasing their contributions and future potential. These presentations must demonstrate why Visionary should retain our current structure and personnel." His gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on me. "Ezra will be presenting for the Design Strategy Department." The room went silent. Everyone knew that was my department, the one I'd built from nothing. "He'll need all project files, client feedback, and success metrics by Wednesday," Pearson added, still looking at me. "Any questions?" I said nothing, my face carefully neutral. Inside, something had shifted. The stakes had just changed dramatically. This wasn't just about my office, or even about Pearson's financial misconduct anymore. This was about my entire department, my team, my projects, my legacy. As everyone filed out after the meeting, Mira, a junior designer who had joined my team last year, approached me. "That's not right," she whispered. "Everyone knows you built this department. Ezra doesn't even understand the basic design principles." I squeezed her arm gently. "Don't worry about it. But Tallulah, trust me," I said, meeting her eyes. "I know exactly what I'm doing." And for the first time since Pearson had given away my office, I truly did. That night, I didn't go home. Instead, I worked in my storage room, combing through years of project files, client communications, financial reports, and team evaluations. I created a comprehensive timeline documenting every success, every innovation, every dollar generated by my department. Then I cross-referenced it with the Carrick co-payments, tracing how company resources had been diverted, while my team delivered results that kept the company profitable. By morning, I had compiled an irrefutable record of both my department's value and Pearson's betrayal. But exposing him directly would be too obvious, too easily dismissed as the bitterness of a demoted employee. I needed something more elegant, something irrefutable, something that would make Pearson and Ezra destroy themselves. As dawn broke, I finally understood exactly what needed to happen. The Visionary Partners visit wasn't an obstacle, it was an opportunity. the perfect stage for the performance I was about to orchestrate. I smiled in my dim storage room, surrounded by the evidence of years of exploitation and betrayal. Soon, very soon, they would understand the mistake they'd made. Because I wasn't just good at designing products, I was excellent at designing consequences. The next morning, I approached Ezra as he lounged in my former office, feet propped on my desk, scrolling through his phone. "Here's everything you requested for the presentation," I said, placing a flash drive on the desk. "All project files, success metrics, and client testimonials." Ezra barely glanced up. "Just summarize it for me. I don't have time to go through all that." "Of course," I replied, my voice professionally pleasant. But Director Pearson specifically asked me to provide the complete files. The Visionary Partners representatives are known for asking detailed questions. That caught his attention. Fear flickered across his face, the fear of someone who knows they're in over their head. "Fine. Leave it." As I turned to leave, he called after me. "Hey, you'll be there, right? In case they ask something technical?" I paused at the doorway. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate. This is your presentation after all." Panic replaced fear. "But I don't know this stuff. Uncle Graham just wants me to look good for my mom." Interesting. He just confirmed what I'd suspected about family dynamics. I tilted my head, considering him. He was younger than I'd initially thought, maybe 25. Privileged, certainly, but also a pawn in his family's game. "I'll help you prepare," I offered, "but I can't do the presentation for you." Relief washed over his face. "Thanks. I owe you one." If only he knew how much. Over the next 3 days, I spent hours helping Ezra understand our department's work. I simplified complex concepts, created detailed notes, and guided him through the presentation structure. I was the perfect mentor, every patient, thorough, supportive, and strategic. Because while the flash drive contained legitimate projects and metrics, I had carefully curated them to tell a specific story, one that would lead to very specific questions from anyone with business acumen, questions Ezra wouldn't be able to answer. Meanwhile, I prepared a second presentation, the real one, and arranged for it to be accessible on the presentation computer as a backup file. On Thursday, Pearson called me to his office. "How's Ezra doing with the presentation prep?" he asked, attempting casual conversation while studying financial reports. "Very well," I replied truthfully. "He's memorized all the talking points." Pearson nodded, still not looking at me. "Good. This acquisition is important, Tallulah. For all of us." I noted the subtle threat in his tone. "Of course. That's why I've been so thorough in helping Ezra prepare." He finally met my eyes. "I know we've had our differences lately, but once this acquisition goes through, there could be new opportunities, better positions, for team players." The implication was clear. Play along now, get rewarded later. I smiled and nodded, the perfect subordinate. That evening, as I walked to my car in the nearly empty parking garage, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find Bridget, Pearson's executive assistant, looking nervously over her shoulder. "Someone accessed my computer last weekend," she said without preamble. My heart skipped, but I kept my expression neutral. "That's concerning. Did you report it to IT?" "No." Her eyes held mine. "Because they looked at files only one other person would care about. Files about Carrick Co." I said nothing, waiting. "I've worked for Graham for 12 years, she continued. "I've covered for him, made excuses, rearranged his schedule to hide his 2-hour lunches with his girlfriends from his wife. I've done everything he's asked." Her voice hardened, "including processing payments to his sister's fake company." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked carefully. "Because I know it was you who accessed those files, and I want you to know." She took a deep breath. "I have copies too, and dated notes about when he instructed me to process each payment." I stared at her, reassessing everything I thought I knew about quiet, efficient Bridget. "He promised me a director position once his sister had enough money to buy out the CEO's shares," she explained. "That was 3 years ago. Last week, he told me the executive floor would be streamlined after the acquisition. I'm being replaced with his nephew's girlfriend." The pieces clicked into place. Bridget wasn't just angry, she was fighting for survival. "What do you want?" I asked. I want what you want, she replied. Justice. And a future with this company. We stood in silence, evaluating each other. Finally, I nodded. Come to my storage room tomorrow morning. Early. The day before the visionary partner's visit, tension in the office reached fever pitch. Departments scrambled to finalize presentations, everyone desperate to prove their value to the potential new owners. At 7 a.m., Bridget arrived at my storage room with a thumb drive and a stack of papers. Everything is here. Payment authorizations, fake invoices, emails between Graham and Lydia planning the whole thing. She placed them on my desk. What are you going to do? I showed her my plan. Her eyes widened. That's brilliant and terrifying. It has to be both, I replied. Are you sure you want to be involved? There's no going back. She straightened her spine. I've been invisible for 12 years. I'm ready to be seen. We spent the day finalizing preparations, working separately to avoid suspicion. That evening, I received a panicked call from Ezra. I can't do this, he blurted. I was practicing, and I forgot everything. I don't understand half these terms. They're going to know I'm a fraud. You are a fraud, I thought but didn't say. Instead, I reassured him. Just follow the script we practiced. I'll be in the room if you need support. Promise? I promise I'll be exactly where I need to be. The morning of the visionary partner's visit dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit, professional, unmemorable, perfect for someone who intended to blend into the background until precisely the right moment. When I arrived, the office was transformed. Fresh flowers in the lobby, premium coffee service, every surface gleaming. The 3 visionary representatives, 2 men and a woman in impeccable suits, were already in the conference room with our CEO and executive team. Presentations began at 9 a.m. sharp. Each department had 30 minutes to showcase their value. By 11:30, it was our turn. Design Strategy, presented by Ezra Pearson, Creative Innovation Specialist. I slipped into the back of the room as Ezra approached the podium, visibly nervous. Pearson gave him an encouraging nod from his seat beside the visionary partner's lead. Good morning, Ezra began, his voice cracking slightly. I'm excited to show you the innovative work of our Design Strategy department. He clicked to the first slide, and I watched him relax slightly as he recognized the familiar content we'd practiced. He made it through the introduction smoothly, gaining confidence as he went. Then came the section on financial impacts. Our design innovations have generated significant revenue growth, he continued, clicking to a graph showing impressive upward trends. As you can see, our ROI has increased 42% year over year. The female visionary representative, Astrid Chen, according to her nameplate, leaned forward. Impressive numbers. Can you walk us through how you achieved that growth despite the documented expenses to Carrick Co.? Ezra froze. Carrick Co. What? Carrick Co., she repeated, glancing at her notes. Your department allocated $812,000 to them over the past 2 years for market research. I'm curious how you maintained such strong margins despite that investment. Ezra looked panicked, turning to Pearson for help. Pearson's face had drained of color. That's not, Ezra stammered. Perhaps we should move on to the next section, Pearson interjected smoothly. We can address specific vendor relationships in the financial review. Of course. Astrid smiled politely. Please continue. Ezra fumbled to find his place, eventually clicking to the next slide, a detailed analysis of the design department's structure. As head of the department, he continued shakily, I've implemented a collaborative approach that, excuse me, interrupted one of the male visionary representatives. According to our background research, Tallulah Reed has led this department for the past 5 years. Are you co-directors? Complete silence fell over the room. Ezra looked like a deer in headlights. Pearson's jaw clenched visibly. There have been recent organizational changes, Pearson explained. Ezra has taken over leadership while Ms. Reed focuses on technical execution. I see, the man replied, making a note. And these changes happened? 3 weeks ago, Pearson answered. Interesting timing, Astrid remarked, just before our acquisition exploration began. The tension in the room was palpable. Ezra attempted to continue but kept losing his place, contradicting himself, and misrepresenting basic concepts. With each stumble, The visionary representatives exchanged increasingly skeptical glances. Finally, after a particularly confused explanation about our design process, Astrid raised her hand. I apologize for interrupting again, but I'm having trouble reconciling the impressive portfolio you're showing with your explanations of how these designs were developed. Could we perhaps hear from someone with more hands-on involvement? Pearson's face flushed. Ezra has full knowledge of all department operations. Nevertheless, she insisted pleasantly, I'd appreciate additional perspective. All eyes turned to me in the back of the room. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I stood slowly. I'd be happy to address any questions. As I walked to the front, I caught Bridget's eye at the doorway. She gave me an imperceptible nod. While I appreciate Ezra's presentation, I began, I believe there's a more comprehensive way to understand our department's contribution. I reached for the presentation remote. With your permission, I've prepared some supplementary materials that might provide clarity. Before Pearson could object, I clicked to access the hidden presentation file Bridget had uploaded that morning. The screen transitioned to a new title slide: Design Strategy, Complete Organizational and Financial Analysis. What I'm about to show you, I continued calmly, is the true story of our department. The room fell completely silent as I clicked to the first slide. A side-by-side comparison of department performance before and after I took leadership, with clear attribution of every major project and its financial impact. As I moved through the presentation, I systematically revealed not just the design successes, but the detailed financial records showing exactly when and how company funds had been diverted to Carrick Co. You'll notice, I explained, pointing to a particularly revealing graph, that these payments coincide precisely with our department's highest-performing quarters, effectively masking the diverted funds. Pearson half rose from his chair. This is inappropriate and unauthorized. Actually, interrupted our CEO, her voice like ice, I'd very much like Ms. Reed to continue. The final section of my presentation included email exchanges between Pearson and his sister, complete with timestamps and verification codes, discussing how to disguise the payments and their plans to use the money to buy company shares. In conclusion, I finished. Our design department has consistently delivered exceptional value despite significant financial handicaps and recent organizational challenges. I smiled directly at the Visionary Partners team. I believe we could deliver even more impressive results under the right leadership. The silence that followed was absolute. Ezra had slumped into a chair, ashen-faced. Pearson stared at me with undisguised hatred. Finally, Astrid Chen closed her portfolio. This has been most illuminating, Ms. Reed. I believe we've seen everything we need to see. The CEO stood abruptly. I suggest we take a brief recess. Graham, my office. Now. As they filed out, the remaining visionary representative approached me. Impressive analysis, Ms. Reed. I have a feeling we'll be talking more about your future with the company. 3 hours later, the official announcement came. Visionary Partners would proceed with the acquisition, with several conditions: an immediate audit of all financial records, a restructuring of senior leadership, and my appointment as Executive Director of Innovation Strategy, NUAA, a new position reporting directly to the Acquisition Transition Team. Pearson and Ezra were escorted from the building that afternoon, their personal items to be shipped later. As security walked them out, I stood in the hallway, watching silently. Pearson stopped briefly beside me. "You've made a powerful enemy," he muttered. "No," I corrected him quietly. "I've removed one." That evening, I packed up my few belongings from the storage room and moved back into my former office. The view of the city at sunset was even more beautiful than I remembered. On the desk sat a small gift bag. Inside was a keycard and a note from Astrid Chen. "Your new executive suite is ready whenever you are. Looking forward to our partnership." I smiled, running my fingers along the edge of my desk, feeling the smooth wood grain. Everything had come full circle. The storage room wouldn't go to waste, though. I had plans to convert it into a creative retreat space for the team, a quiet place where ideas could develop undisturbed. After all, I knew firsthand how much clarity could come from working in unexpected places. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about revealing them for exactly who they are then stepping aside as they destroy themselves. The most satisfying victories aren't won through force, but through patience, preparation, and perfect timing. I opened my laptop and began drafting my first company-wide memo as executive director. Subject line, moving forward together. If you enjoyed this workplace revenge story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more satisfying tales of justice served. Have you ever witnessed someone getting exactly what they deserved at work? Share your stories in the comments below. And if you want to see more videos like this one, hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do, it's what you reveal when the time is just right. Seven more days, without pay, for questioning my authority during the client meeting. Kent announced it loudly across the open office space, arms crossed over his chest, eyes drilling into mine. 20 coworkers pretended to focus on their monitors. No one looked at me directly. The initial 3-day suspension clearly wasn't enough for you to learn your place, Verna. I stood perfectly still, controlling my breathing like I'd been trained. Not too shallow, not too deep, just enough to keep thinking clearly. Do you understand? He pressed when I didn't respond. Perfectly, I replied, voice steady. I gathered my worn leather notebook, the same one I'd carried through war zones and back. The one with calculations proving something was terribly wrong with our latest testing reports. Kent smiled, mistaking my calm for defeat. I simply nodded, turned, and walked out without another word. The April air hit my face as I pushed through the glass doors. My car was parked at the far end of the lot, where Kent had reassigned my space after my first suspension. I placed my notebook carefully on the passenger seat and sat motionless behind the wheel. Before I continue, thank you for listening to my story. I'm curious, where are you listening from today? Drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you're in. Sometimes knowing who's hearing your story makes the telling easier. My name is Verna Thale. I'm 42 years old with a face most people forget minutes after meeting me. That's not self-pity. It was an asset in my former life. I'm average height, average build, with brown hair that doesn't quite reach my shoulders. I wear minimal makeup and clothes designed to blend in. The kind of person who can stand in a crowded elevator without anyone remembering I was there. For 12 years, that forgettability was my greatest tool. I wasn't always Verna Thale. I've had many names, many identities. What remained consistent was my purpose. I verified intelligence about protective equipment provided to military personnel. Equipment meant to keep them alive. My background wasn't in engineering or materials science. It was in mathematics and human observation. I could spot patterns in data and inconsistencies in human behavior with equal precision. When manufacturers claimed certain levels of protection, I analyzed whether those claims matched reality. Sometimes this meant sitting in bland offices, reviewing testing data. Other times it meant being in locations where no American was supposed to exist, watching how our equipment performed when bullets were real and explosives weren't theoretical. I've held the hands of 19-year-olds who died because their protective gear failed. I've promised them their deaths wouldn't be meaningless, that someone would care about why they died, that someone would make it right. 3 years ago, I grew tired. The travel, the aliases, the constant vigilance, it hollows you out eventually. I requested reassignment to something quieter. My superiors agreed I'd earned it. They helped create a normal employment record, showing a sensible career progression in data analysis. Nothing remarkable, nothing threatening, just another mid-level professional taking notes in meetings. That's how I joined Avantex Testing Services, a small firm handling quality assurance for military equipment. My role was simple: review testing protocols and verify results before certification. I was supposed to be the final safeguard, ensuring that what we claimed about equipment performance was absolutely true. For 2 years, everything seemed legitimate. The company wasn't perfect. Kent pushed timelines too hard and valued efficiency over thoroughness, but the testing itself appeared sound. Until 3 weeks ago, I was reviewing data for a new lightweight ballistic vest. Something about the numbers bothered me, small inconsistencies in the penetration tests. I recalculated everything and found that the vests were failing at impact velocities they should have withstood according to military requirements. Yet the final report showed passing grades across all testing phases. I checked previous reports and found similar patterns. Equipment that should have failed was being certified as combat ready. When I first approached Kent about these discrepancies, he seemed concerned. These are serious accusations, Verna. I'll need to review everything myself. 2 days later, he called me into his office. I checked your findings, he said while shuffling papers on his desk. You've made some analytical errors. The equipment meets all required standards. He slid a folder toward me. Here's where you went wrong. The documents inside contained calculations I'd never seen, using testing protocols different from our standard procedures. But this isn't how Verna, he interrupted. You're relatively new to formal testing environments. These modified protocols have been approved for this particular contract. By whom? I asked. His expression hardened. That's above your clearance level. But if the vests fail at these velocities, 3 days, he said. Take 3 days without pay to reconsider your priorities here. When you return, I expect this matter to be closed. I spent those 3 days documenting everything, every calculation, every discrepancy, every modified protocol that didn't match military requirements. I created a comprehensive analysis showing exactly how the equipment was being misrepresented. When I returned, I remained quiet for a week. I observed who handled the reports, who signed off on final certifications, who communicated with the clients. I noticed patterns in communication that suggested Kent wasn't acting alone. Then came the client meeting. Representatives from the Military Procurement Division visited to discuss the new contract. During the presentation of testing results, I raised my hand. Kent's jaw tightened, but with clients present, he had to acknowledge me. Yes, Verna? Make it quick, please. I've found some inconsistencies in our testing data that I believe warrant further review before certification, I said calmly. The vests are failing at impact velocities that should be within protective range. The room went quiet. One of the military representatives leaned forward. What kind of inconsistencies? Before I could answer, Kent laughed, a deliberate, dismissive sound. Verna's new to our testing protocols. She's misinterpreting standard variations in the data. Everything has been verified by our senior team, but the numbers clearly show. That's enough. Kent cut me off. We'll discuss your concerns privately, Verna. The military representatives exchanged glances but didn't press further. The meeting continued while I sat silently, documenting every word in my notebook. Afterward, Kent walked directly to my desk, my office. Inside, he didn't offer me a seat. What the hell was that? He demanded. The vests are failing, Kent. Soldiers will die believing they're protected when they're not. You have no idea the complexity of these contracts or the modifications that have been approved. Show me the documentation for these approved modifications, I challenged. His expression shifted. Something calculating replaced the anger. You know what your problem is, Verna? You think you're irreplaceable. You're not. You're a data analyst with decent skills, but limited understanding of how this business works. This isn't about business. It's about lives. He laughed again. How charmingly naive. Take tomorrow off, without pay. Think about whether this is the hill you want to die on professionally. I didn't back down. The next day, instead of staying home, I arrived with my complete analysis and requested a meeting with both Kent and his superior, Murray. I was told Murray was unavailable, but I left the report with his assistant. 2 days later, Kent stopped by my desk with a strange smile. Murray reviewed your report, he said quietly. He found your methodology fundamentally flawed. That's impossible, yet true. He suggested you might benefit from additional training before continuing in your current role. Something felt wrong. I'd like to speak with Murray directly. He's traveling for the next 2 weeks, but he left this for you. Kent handed me an internal memo, questioning my analytical abilities and recommending a review of my position. I later discovered Murray had never seen my report. His assistant had given it directly to Kent, who had fabricated the response. The next client meeting was when Kent announced my extended suspension. 7 more days without pay, a public humiliation designed to break me or force me to quit. What he didn't understand was that I'd faced much worse than an office bully with something to hide. I'd been shot at, trapped behind enemy lines, and interrogated by people who didn't bother with office politics before resorting to violence. As I sat in my car that morning, suspended for the second time, I made a decision. Kent believed he'd won, that I would either resign or return broken and compliant. He had no idea who he was dealing with, or who would be making calls on my behalf. In my apartment that evening, I removed the false bottom from my kitchen drawer. Inside lay a small metal box containing 3 phone numbers, not saved in any phone, not written anywhere else. 3 connections to the person I used to be. 3 people who understood exactly what it meant when protection failed. It was time to make some calls. I made the calls using a phone that wasn't connected to any account in my name, one that Kent and Aventex knew nothing about. The first number belonged to Lane. We'd met during a mission in Eastern Europe 15 years ago. She'd been posing as a materials procurement specialist for a contractor, while actually assessing which officials could be compromised. I was evaluating whether a new type of body armor would actually stop the caliber of ammunition common in the region. When gunfire erupted during what was supposed to be a routine meeting, Lane and I escaped together. We spent 3 days hiding in an abandoned train station, taking turns sleeping while the other kept watch. By the time extraction arrived, we knew each other's real capabilities. Now, Lane headed an international oversight committee that approved military contracts. Verna, she answered, on the second ring. No surprise in her voice, though it had been nearly 2 years since we'd spoken. You're still using this number. Some connections are worth maintaining, I said. This isn't social, she replied. Not a question. No, tell me. I explained the situation at Avantex, the falsified testing data, the modified protocols, the equipment being certified despite failing critical tests. You're certain? She asked when I finished. I've triple-checked everything. The vests are failing at velocities they're rated to withstand. Someone's hiding it. Silent stretch between us. Then, send me what you have. Use the old method. The old method was a dead drop technique we'd developed during our active years. Digital information hidden within seemingly innocent files, accessible only with specific decryption protocols. There's more, I continued. I think this goes beyond my immediate supervisor. The pattern suggests systematic falsification across multiple contracts. How high? I don't know yet. That's partly why I'm calling. I'll make inquiries, Lane said, discreetly. Thank you. Verna, she added before I could disconnect. Be careful. If you're right, someone's prioritizing profit over protection. Those people rarely stop at workplace discipline. The second call went to Marcus. He'd been a field operative alongside me for 3 years. We'd shared cramped surveillance positions for days at a time, communicating in whispers and hand signals. When an operation went wrong near Kabul, he carried me 2 miles to extraction with a bullet lodged in his shoulder. Now he worked as a senior examiner in the Pentagon's budget office, reviewing military expenditures. I thought you were done, he said when he realized who was calling. So did I. But some promises don't expire. Marcus understood immediately. We'd both made those promises. To wounded soldiers, to families receiving folded flags, to ourselves on nights when sleep wouldn't come. I explained the situation at Avantex. 7 days suspension? He asked when I finished. Yes, that gives us time. Can you transmit your evidence? Already packaging it for Lane. I'll copy you. Good. I'll run trace analysis on Avantex's financial patterns. See where the money's flowing. Who's benefiting from these shortcuts? Be careful, I warned. This likely involves people with significant influence. Always, he replied. You taught me that. The third call was the hardest. Not because of any technical difficulty, but because it reopened wounds that had never fully healed. The number connected me to Drew. 7 years ago, outside Kandahar, I'd pulled him from a burning vehicle after an IED detonated beneath it. His body armor had partially melted into his skin. The helmet that should have protected him from the impact had cracked along a manufacturing seam. He'd lost his left leg below the knee and suffered third-degree burns across 40% of his body. During his recovery, I visited whenever my cover allowed. We never discussed my actual role. He believed I was a civilian contractor who happened to be nearby during the attack, but a connection formed between us. Now Drew worked as the personal aide to General Harmon, who signed off on equipment contracts for an entire division. This is unexpected, he said when he recognized my voice. I apologize for that. Don't. It's good to hear from you. Everything okay? I hesitated. Drew had suffered enough because of equipment failures. Involving him meant asking him to relive that trauma. Verna, are you there? I'm here. And no, everything is not okay. I explained the situation, providing specific details about the testing discrepancies. When I finished, Drew was silent for so long I thought the connection might have dropped. Drew? I'm here, he said. His voice changed. Harder. You're telling me they're knowingly certifying substandard protection? Again? Yes. And you have proof? Substantial proof. Another long pause. Then, send everything you have. I'll make sure the general sees it personally. This might blow back on you, I cautioned. Let it, Drew answered. I still wake up reaching for a leg that isn't there. If I can prevent someone else from experiencing that, any consequence is worth it. After completing the calls, I sat in my small living room, staring at the wall. My apartment was sparsely furnished, a habit from years of needing to leave places quickly. Nothing irreplaceable, nothing that couldn't be abandoned if necessary. For the next 7 days, I maintained complete radio silence. I didn't contact anyone at Avantex. I didn't reach out to Lane, Marcus, or Drew. I didn't check my work email. Instead, I did what years of training had taught me to do. I waited patiently and prepared for multiple outcomes. I fixed my leaking kitchen sink, painted my hallway a soft blue, organized my bookshelves. Simple, repetitive tasks that kept my hands busy while my mind processed possibilities. At night, I reviewed my documentation again and again, ensuring I hadn't missed anything. I created multiple copies stored in different locations, some physical, some digital, all secure. On the 3rd day of my suspension, someone knocked on my apartment door. I approached silently, checking through the peephole. It was Jess from accounting at Avantex, shifting nervously from foot to foot. I opened the door but blocked the entrance. Jess, this is unexpected. Her eyes darted past me into the apartment, then back to my face. Kent doesn't know I'm here. I waited, saying nothing. Can I come in? She asked, glancing down the hallway. I hesitated, then stepped aside. Once inside, Jess didn't sit when I offered. She stood in my living room, clutching her purse against her chest. I've been reviewing the financial approvals for the testing protocols, she said. The ones you questioned. I kept my expression neutral. And there are irregularities, payments to consultants with no deliverables, budget transfers between projects without proper documentation, cost adjustments after certification. Why are you telling me this? Jess took a deep breath. My brother's in the Army. 2nd deployment. He wears the equipment we certify. Understanding dawned. You're worried. Terrified, she corrected. If what you found is true, it is. Then my brother and his unit are walking around thinking they're protected when they're not. Her voice broke slightly. I can't let that happen. What do you want from me, Jess? I want to help. I have access to financial records you don't. Transaction histories, vendor agreements, modification approvals. I considered her offer carefully. Trust wasn't something I gave easily, and this could be an elaborate trap set by Kent. How do I know Kent didn't send you? Jess reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive. Because this would get me fired, possibly prosecuted. It contains every financial record related to test modifications for the past 3 years. Look at it. If you decide I'm trustworthy, contact me. She placed the drive on my coffee table and headed toward the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. My brother trusts that equipment with his life, she said quietly. I need to make sure it deserves that trust. After she left, I spent hours examining the files on the drive, cross-referencing them with my own findings. What emerged was a troubling pattern. Test modifications coincided with payments to a consulting firm called Strategic Solutions Group. Further investigation revealed this firm was owned by a holding company connected to Murray's brother-in-law. Money was flowing from the manufacturer to Strategic Solutions, then being distributed through various channels, including offshore accounts linked to shell companies. Some of those companies made regular payments to accounts associated with both Murray and Kent. They weren't just falsifying test results, they were being paid to do so. By day 5 of my suspension, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier linking the falsified testing to specific payments. I encrypted this information and sent it to Lane, Marcus, and Drew using our secure channels. Responses came within hours. From Lane, verification complete. Bringing in specialized investigators. Stay in position. From Marcus, financial trails confirmed. Found 6 additional contracts with identical patterns. Briefing select committee members today. From Drew. General Harmon, reviewing personally, wants to meet with you when this concludes. On day 7, my last day of suspension, my doorbell rang at 6:15 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw 2 individuals in plain clothes, standing in the hallway. Nothing about them immediately identified their affiliation, but their posture and awareness screamed federal service. I opened the door. "Miss Thale?" the woman asked, showing identification too quickly for me to fully read it. "Yes. May we come in? We have some questions regarding Avantex's testing services." I let them in, offered coffee, which they declined, and answered their questions for nearly 3 hours. They asked about testing protocols, modification approvals, reporting structures, financial processes. I provided everything I knew, supported by documentation. When they finally stood to leave, the woman handed me a card with just a phone number. "If you think of anything else, call this number directly." "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on what we find," the man replied, "but I would prepare to return to work tomorrow as scheduled." "Will I be safe?" They exchanged glances. The woman spoke. "No one at Avantex has been informed about this investigation. As far as they know, you're simply returning from suspension. We suggest maintaining that appearance." After they left, I spent the remainder of the day mentally preparing to re-enter the office, not as the compliant employee Kent expected to see, but as the trained operative I had once been, watchful, patient, gathering information. I slept dreamlessly that night, a skill honed during years of operations when rest was scarce but essential. The next morning, day 8, I dressed in unremarkable business attire and drove to Avantex. I used my badge to enter the building at exactly 8 a.m., nodding politely to security as if nothing unusual had occurred. The office felt strange. Conversations stopped when I passed. People watched me from the corners of their eyes. My desk appeared untouched, exactly as I had left it a week earlier. Kent's office remained empty throughout the morning. Whispers circulated that he was in an emergency meeting with Murray and the legal team. No one seemed to know why. At 11:47 a.m., the front desk receptionist called my extension. "Verna, there are some visitors here asking for you." I gathered my notebook and walked calmly to the lobby. 3 people stood waiting. Though they wore civilian clothes with no visible identification, I recognized them immediately. Lane stood nearest the door, her posture relaxed but alert. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a navy blazer over a white shirt. Nothing about her appearance suggested the power she wielded in international oversight. Marcus leaned against the reception desk, quietly chatting with the receptionist. His friendly demeanor concealed the fact that he could trace financial transactions across dozens of shell companies within hours. Drew stood by the window, sunshine highlighting the surgical scars on the left side of his face. His prosthetic leg was hidden beneath perfectly tailored slacks. Only his eyes revealed his true feelings, cold, determined, focused. When I approached, Lane stepped forward. "Miss Thale," she said formally, extending her hand. "Thank you for meeting with us." I shook her hand, maintaining the pretense that we were professional acquaintances rather than people who had once escaped death together. "Of course. How can I help you?" "We need to discuss some discrepancies in testing protocols for several defense contracts," she replied, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by those nearby. "Is there a conference room available?" The receptionist quickly directed us to the largest meeting room, looking nervous as she made the arrangements. Word spread rapidly through the office that something significant was happening. As we walked toward the meeting room, Jess from accounting approached, files clutched to her chest. "I have the financial documentation you requested," she said quietly. Lane nodded. "Please join us." Inside the meeting room, the atmosphere changed instantly. Professional facades dropped, replaced by the focused efficiency of people who had worked in high-pressure situations. "Everything's proceeding," Lane said, placing a slim laptop on the table. "Federal investigators have been building the case since we received your information. They'll arrive within the hour." "How widespread is it?" I asked. Marcus grimaced. 6 major contracts over 3 years, all with the same pattern of falsified testing and financial kickbacks. Possibly more we haven't uncovered yet. "And Kent, Murray, both heavily implicated," Drew said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "along with executives at 2 manufacturing companies." Lane turned her laptop toward me, showing a complex chart of financial transactions. The money trail is clear. Manufacturers paid consulting fees to Strategic Solutions Group, which distributed funds through multiple channels. Some went offshore, then returned as investments in accounts controlled by Kent and Murray. How much? I asked. Over $7 million. I sat back, letting that number sink in. $7 million in exchange for putting soldiers' lives at risk. Marcus leaned forward. There's something else. The vests you flagged. They're already in distribution. 3,000 units shipped last month. My stomach tightened. Where? Forward operating bases in 3 conflict zones. Drew's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. General Harmon has ordered an immediate recall, but it will take time to reach everyone. We need to move quickly, Lane said, checking her watch. Federal agents are coordinating with military investigators. They'll need your direct testimony. Before I could respond, the door opened. Kent stood in the doorway, Murray just behind him. Both men stopped abruptly when they saw who occupied the room. Kent recovered first, smoothing his expression into practiced confidence. I wasn't informed of a meeting in this room. That was intentional, Lane replied coolly, standing to face him. She didn't introduce herself or explain her presence. Kent's eyes darted between us, calculation evident. I see Verna has returned from her suspension and brought friends. Colleagues would be more accurate, Marcus said, remaining seated but shifting slightly to block Kent's view of the laptop screen. Murray stepped forward. This is highly irregular. I don't know who you people are, but this is a private company, and you're in a restricted area. I'll have to ask you to leave immediately. Drew smiled thinly. We're not going anywhere. Kent's expression hardened as he assessed the situation. Verna, in my office. Now, the rest of you can speak with our legal department if you have legitimate business here. I didn't move. I think we should all stay right here, Kent. There are some testing protocols we need to discuss. A flash of uncertainty crossed his face before he regained composure. If this is about your continued misunderstanding of our modified testing procedures, it's about fraud, Lane interrupted. Falsification of safety testing results, endangering military personnel, financial kickbacks, wire fraud across state lines. Should I continue? Murray's face paled. These are absurd accusations. We maintain the highest testing standards in the industry. Is that why you've been accepting payments through offshore accounts? Marcus asked, his tone conversational. For maintaining high standards? Kent's expression shifted from confidence to calculation. Whatever Verna has told you is the perspective of a disgruntled employee who doesn't understand our industry. Nothing more. I understand perfectly, I said, rising to stand beside Lane. I understand that you've been certifying equipment that fails critical safety tests, equipment that soldiers trust with their lives. You have no proof of that, Murray interjected, but his voice lacked conviction. Drew finally stood, moving with the careful grace of someone who has spent years adapting to a prosthetic limb. We have extensive proof, financial records, testing data, internal communications, witness testimony. Kent's eyes narrowed as he studied Drew. Who exactly are you people? The outer door opened again. 2 individuals in suits entered, followed by military personnel in uniform. One showed credentials that made both Kent and Murray step back. Federal investigators, Lane explained unnecessarily. Hear about those testing protocols we mentioned. What followed was a carefully orchestrated process. The meeting room became command central as additional investigators arrived. Employees were interviewed, computers seized, records secured. Kent and Murray were separated and questioned in different rooms. Their initial bravado crumbled when shown the evidence, particularly when investigators revealed they had been under surveillance for weeks. I provided my formal statement, walking investigators through the testing discrepancies I had discovered and the responses from management when I raised concerns. By late afternoon, the office was in upheaval. Kent and Murray were escorted from the building, not in handcuffs but clearly in custody. Word spread quickly about the nature of the investigation. As daylight faded, Lane found me in the small break room, away from the chaos. You did well, she said, pouring coffee for both of us. What happens now? The investigation continues. Prosecutions will follow, but the immediate priority is addressing those 3,000 vests already distributed. And the company? That's being determined. There are options. The work you do here is essential, when done correctly. I nodded, understanding her meaning. The company might survive, but under new management and oversight. Drew appeared in the doorway. General Harmon is on secured video conference. He'd like to speak with you, Verna. In a makeshift secure room, General Harmon's face appeared on screen. His expression was grave. Miss Thale, he began formally, then softened. Verna, Drew has explained your background and your actions these past weeks. I want to personally thank you for bringing this to light. I just did what anyone would do, I replied. No, he said firmly. You did what very few would have the courage or capacity to do. You risked your career and possibly more to protect soldiers you'll never meet. He paused, glancing at documents off-screen. We've begun the recall process for the compromised equipment. Unfortunately, some units are in remote locations, difficult to reach quickly. The unspoken implication hung heavily in the air. Some soldiers would continue wearing inadequate protection until replacements arrived. I have a proposal, the general continued. We need someone to oversee the implementation of new testing protocols. Someone with your background in both field operations and data analysis. Someone who understands what's at stake when equipment fails. Are you offering me a job, General? I'm offering you a mission, he corrected. One that aligns with promises I suspect you've made along the way. 4 months later, I stood in a different testing facility, one under direct military oversight, with transparent protocols and multiple verification requirements. The walls of my office held photographs of soldiers in the field, not as decoration, but as reminder of purpose. Kent and Murray had both accepted plea deals, providing evidence against manufacturing executives in exchange for reduced sentences. They would still serve substantial prison time for fraud and criminal endangerment. The company formerly known as Avantex had been restructured, with new leadership and strict oversight provisions. Jess from accounting now headed a compliance team that reported directly to an independent board. The compromised vests had all been recalled and replaced. No lives had been lost due to the faulty equipment. A fortunate outcome we celebrated quietly. One warm Tuesday afternoon, Drew visited my new office, moving more comfortably with his prosthetic than he had months earlier. General Harmon asked me to deliver this personally, he said, placing a folder on my desk. Inside was documentation for a new testing standard, officially named the Adler Protocol, after a young soldier who had died years earlier when his equipment failed during combat. A soldier whose hand I had held as he whispered final words meant for his mother. They're implementing it across all defense contracts, Drew explained. Every piece of protective equipment will be tested under these protocols. No exceptions, no modifications without multi-level review. I traced my fingers over the document, remembering a promise made in dust and blood. He would have been pleased. Yes, Drew agreed quietly. He would. We stood together at the window, watching as technicians in the testing range below prepared equipment for impact evaluation. Real tests, honest results. Not exactly the revenge some might have expected, Drew commented. It wasn't about revenge, I replied. It was about keeping promises. In the months that followed, I developed additional testing protocols, each designed to close loopholes and ensure that protective equipment actually protected. I trained new analysts to spot irregularities and question results that seemed too perfect. Sometimes during late evenings in my office, I would remember Kent's smirk as he announced my suspension, how certain he had been of his power, how confidently he had gambled with others' lives for financial gain. His current accommodation in a federal prison was certainly a fall from grace, but the true consequence, the one that mattered, was the new system that made it harder for others to repeat his crimes. 1 year after the investigation, I received a small package. Inside was a worn patch from a military uniform, along with a handwritten note. This vest stopped exactly what it was supposed to stop. I'm coming home to my family because the equipment worked. Someone told me you're the reason why. Thank you isn't enough, but it's what I have to offer. Sergeant T. I pinned the patch to my office wall, next to others that had arrived in similar packages. Tangible reminders that systems can be fixed, that speaking up matters, that promises kept save lives. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you in any way, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like mine reach others who might need to hear them. If you've ever stood up against wrongdoing, even when it was difficult, share your experience in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our struggles makes all the difference.